She was so shocked by what she witnessed in the afterlife that for the first time in her life she found it impossible to believe. What is going on? She seemed to wonder. Frances Banks, an extraordinary nun, had dedicated her life to preparing for the spiritual truth she believed awaited souls beyond earthly life. But what she discovered upon crossing that border so stunned her that she decided on something unusual, to share her experience from beyond, no matter the obstacles. Frances longed for people on earth to understand that life after death was radically different from what they had been taught. On the other side, the sun does not set as we imagine, she said in her messages, clarifying that these were not falsehoods, but limitations in our human perception. For many, these details were disconcerting, even terrifying. But the most surprising part of her revelations was her declaration that heaven and hell were completely different from the ideas we commonly have about them. Frances Banks, a committed nun who dedicated her life to the service of the Lord and to her own spiritual growth, passed away in 1965. However, approximately 18 months after her death, messages began to emerge from her through her friend Helene Gree. Helene, completely bewildered, began to receive these communications despite having previously demonstrated no mediumistic ability or interest in practices related to spiritualism. Curiously, Frances in life had categorically rejected these activities, but managed to establish a bond with Helene from the other side, probably due to the strong friendship and trust they shared. What made these communications particularly striking was the spiritual courage that had always defined Frances. Thanks to the strength of her spirit, she was able to cross the barrier that separates our world from the astral plane. In her messages, Frances confessed that, upon crossing to the other side, she encountered a reality that was nothing like what she had anticipated. Since she was a child, she had heard stories about how, upon death, each person's soul would be brought before God's throne, surrounded by angels, to receive judgment. However, what she experienced was completely different. Frances Banks' story not only challenges our conventional ideas about heaven and hell, but also invites us to reflect deeply on the essence of life after death. What really awaits us on the other side? According to Frances, the truth is much more complex than we imagine, and understanding it could help us avoid unnecessary suffering during our transition to that new existence. Here's what Frances Banks shared from the other side. I thought that at the end of my earthly life I would face a strict judgment, just as we have always been taught. But the reality was completely different. The first thing that appeared before me were two paths, or more accurately, two versions of my life. The first represented what I should have been, the best version of myself, what I was designed to be, and the perfect destiny that God had prepared for me. The second showed my life as I actually lived it. These two lines unfolded before me like open books, allowing me to examine every detail of both. The core of this experience was that my soul had the ability to compare these two versions, the purpose for which I was sent to the earthly world and what I finally managed to achieve. It was a moment of painful clarity. As I contrasted my real life with the Creator's perfect plan, I was overcome with deep regret as I realized that I had only partially fulfilled the divine purpose for my existence. Much of what I failed to achieve was a consequence of my own laziness, my lack of courage, and my tendency to succumb to temptations. I acknowledged my faults and the sins I had committed, and each one of them was laid before me with unrelenting honesty. There was no hiding them or escaping them. Everything I had done, along with the justifications I had used, was exposed in all its rawness. On the spiritual plane, it is not possible to deceive oneself. There prevails an absolute clarity that eliminates any possibility of self-deception. Those who, during their earthly life, refused to face their faults or betrayed their light side in favor of the dark, experience intense suffering when they reach the other world. They fail to find inner peace because the weight of their mistakes and wrongdoings overwhelms them, blocking their progress to higher spheres. The further we stray from divine laws in our earthly life, the deeper our suffering will be in the afterlife. Frances Banks was emphatic in her messages. There is no final judgment carried out by a Lord or divine figure. There are no external judges, she stated. It is we who judge ourselves through our own honesty. Hell is not a physical place, but a state of the soul. If someone is filled with darkness, even in a heavenly environment he will experience the torment of his own mind. Francis stressed that each individual is judged solely by his conscience, from which no one can escape. "I myself was my own accuser," she confessed. That moment when you are confronted with the truth is inevitable. There is no way to avoid this judgment. No one can be another's judge. Only you can judge yourself by facing the reality of who you are at your core. For many people, facing their own honesty is deeply painful. Francis Banks described this process as a crucible of truth, a time when one must confront and accept all that one is and has done. According to her, this internal reckoning represents one of the most difficult challenges the soul faces after death. Francis moved on to a new level of existence, a place she called House of Rest. However, she did not stay there for long. After that brief pause, she was faced with a crucial decision: choosing what activity she would dedicate her new life to in the afterlife. As in her earthly life, Francis found her purpose in serving others. She decided to help souls trapped in what she described as the land of darkness, a region where spiritually fallen spirits could not ascend to the higher spheres of existence. In simple terms, it was the place destined for sinners. In her communications from the other side, Francis described this region as an Adam for the spirit and mind of those who inhabited it. There were souls who had not sought repentance and who somehow continued to live as they did on earth, albeit under completely different circumstances. While they could no longer commit evil acts, they were also unable to free themselves from their selfish desires, which caused them great internal suffering. Francis emphasized that this suffering was not linked to the will of God. Each soul creates its own destiny through the choices it makes, and the suffering they experience is simply the result of those choices. To illustrate, the nun offered a clear example. It is as if every day we walked towards an erupting volcano, put our hand in its flames, and then wondered why we ended up burned. Many souls do not understand the consequences of their actions and blame God for their situation. In this way, they sink even deeper into their own hell. On the other hand, there are those who are fully aware of where they are and the actions that led them there, but show no interest in changing. These souls, according to Francis, are so deeply affected by sin that they will need a long time to free themselves from the darkness that has contaminated their essence. Francis Banks explained that, by choosing a path of service in the afterlife, she must often descend into the darkest regions of the lower levels to assist suffering souls. Her mission is to guide them towards the light and awaken in them the longing to redeem themselves. According to Francis, no soul is destined to remain in darkness forever. However, to get out of there, each soul must fulfill 3 essential requirements. Recognize its own mistakes. Cultivate a genuine desire to correct them. Commit to helping other souls move forward. Francis saw this process as reasonable and fair. Those who negatively affected the well-being of others in earthly life now have the responsibility to help others find their redemption, she would say. A year and a half after her passing, Francis shared that, thanks to her unwavering dedication to service in the afterlife, she had earned the right to ascend to a higher level of the spiritual plane. As she described, this new level was even more beautiful than anything she had known during her youth on earth. Nahi did not offer many details about M's life, but mentioned something astonishing. Her body is now made entirely of light. She also added that, during her time in the afterlife, she had gained a deeper understanding of her state of consciousness. Francis Banks explained that, in the afterlife, we not only choose a place for our existence, but we also determine the form of our spiritual body. Francis explained further, we gain access to this form by changing the state of our consciousness. However, I still have much to learn at the higher levels. She also admitted that she often asked herself a recurring question: where is God? The answer she received was always the same: even from these spheres, he remains distant. We cannot perceive him yet because we are not ready for it, but we are moving forward on that path. Helene Gree, the friend who served as a channel for Francis Banks' messages from beyond the grave, announced that she would no longer receive any further communications. Francis had ascended to higher spheres of the spiritual world, from where establishing contact with the earthly plane is almost impossible. In addition, according to Helene, Francis had lost interest in the affairs of life on earth. Despite this, Francis left us valuable teachings about the continuing destiny of souls and profound reflections on what we will face when we complete our earthly journey. If what he shared from the other side is true, many of us should better prepare ourselves so that the transition to that world is not a negative impact, but simply another stage in our journey towards eternity. When it happened, I experienced a feeling that was impossible to describe in words. It was a mixture of profound wonder and paralyzing fear. I could not understand how something so extraordinary could be happening to me. My shock knew no bounds, for what I saw and what I became defied all logic. Yet it was all completely real, and as I fully understood it, I felt a shiver of terror run through me. Suddenly, without any clear explanation, I realized that I had become invisible to others. At the same time, I saw my own body lying on the bed, motionless and without signs of life. It was then that something completely unexpected happened, something I could never have imagined. Thus begins one of the most impressive messages from beyond the grave, sent by a man named Robert Benson. These communications, packed with captivating details about the workings of life after death, were carefully documented. The history of these messages dates back to 1909, when Benson struck up a friendship with a writer named Anthony Borgia. Robert and Anthony developed a deep connection, though their relationship was brief, as Benson passed away just 5 years later at the age of 42. His friend's death deeply impacted Anthony, who often wondered where Robert was at that time. As a child, Borgia had displayed extraordinary mediumistic ability, and it was not long before he began receiving messages from beyond, coming directly from Benson. Through these communications, Benson offered detailed insight into what happens when a person leaves the physical world behind. He accurately recounted his own transition to the afterlife and shared how he lived out his final days on Earth. Benson described that as the end approached, he experienced not fear, but a constant weariness accompanied by a growing curiosity about what was to come. In my last days, Benson explained, I felt an incessant sleepiness, as if my consciousness were descending to some unknown place. There was no pain, only a peculiar sense of peace. One day, he felt an uncontrollable urge to stand up. To his surprise, he managed to do so effortlessly, despite the weakness his illness had left him with. At that instant, he realized something disconcerting. The family members present in the room did not seem to notice him. When he turned, he saw his own body lying on the bed. It was a chilling moment, Benson confessed. I understood immediately what had happened. I had died. However, my existence had not come to an end. I felt more alive than ever, and my illness was no longer present. This story is just the beginning of the messages that Robert Benson shared from beyond the grave. Through Anthony Borgia, he revealed fascinating information about what happens after death, offering a perspective that has captured the attention and touched the hearts of those seeking to understand the enigma of existence beyond the earthly plane. As soon as the certainty that my time on Earth had come to an end became clearer in my mind, I felt the presence of my friend Edwin, who had departed for the other world some years earlier. He greeted me with a warm welcome and invited me to accompany him on a journey to the afterlife. With a reassuring smile, he suggested that I take his hand, not be afraid, and if I preferred, close my eyes to make the experience easier. I decided to trust him, closed my eyes, and left everything in his hands. As soon as I took his hand, a slight floating sensation enveloped me, as if I were dreaming. However, everything was completely real. To my surprise, at no point did I feel afraid. We moved faster and faster, passing through different planes of existence. With each transition, I noticed changes in the environment. First, the space became cold, and then warm. Although I no longer possessed a physical body, my soul seemed able to perceive these differences in a unique way, not physically, but rather mentally. It is interesting because even on Earth we distinguish between body heat and emotional warmth of the heart, so it was not so strange to experience something similar in the other world. When we finally stopped, I found myself in an amazing place. Before me was a house that, at first glance, looked very similar to the one I had inhabited on Earth. However, there was one obvious difference. This version was completely renovated, beautified, and surrounded by a stunning garden. This garden was very different from any other I had known in life. There were no more weeds or messy branches. Instead, everything was decorated with an abundance of magnificent flowers that radiated extraordinary colors and shapes. What really caught my attention was not just the flowers themselves, but the stunning diversity and richness of their colors, each one more astonishing than the last. As I approached one of them, I could sense a vibrant energy that seemed to emanate from within, a stream of infinite vitality flowing towards me. It was as if the flowers were communicating a message through a musical language, generating a soft and perfect harmony that permeated the entire place. Intrigued by this spectacle, I asked Edwin who had created such a wonderful garden. His answer left me amazed. This house and everything around it are the result of what you yourself built during your earthly life. Here, each person receives exactly what he has earned. Heaven and hell are not external places, but states that each one creates for himself. What you see here is an extension of your true actions and qualities. Edwin explained that in the afterlife, many people who in life enjoyed activities such as gardening continue to cultivate that passion, caring for spaces similar to this one. Likewise, other human occupations can be perpetuated in the spiritual plane, reflecting the interests and talents that each soul had on earth. As I took all this in, I felt my transition from the physical to the spiritual plane becoming more and more complete. I experienced no fatigue or weakness. On the contrary, my consciousness began to immerse itself in a serenity and peace impossible to describe in words. The guide suggested that Benson take a break, and he accepted the recommendation. When he woke up, he felt full of energy and vitality like never before. As soon as he regained consciousness, he thought of Edwin, and within seconds, his friend appeared beside him. Benson was amazed by the speed with which Edwin arrived, and at that moment he understood that, in the afterlife, souls can move at the speed of thought. Edwin suggested to Robert that they take a brief tour of the place where he was after his death. "We call this territory the city," Edwin explained. In one of the areas of the city, Robert observed people who seemed to be in deep rest. Edwin clarified that these souls belonged to individuals who, during their life on Earth, had suffered from prolonged illnesses or physical ailments. When they died, the mental exhaustion caused by so much suffering left a mark on their spiritual bodies, which explained their current state of recovery. These souls, Edwin explained, need deep rest to recover. Here they go through a regeneration process before they are ready to continue on their way. To give him a better perspective of the place, Edwin took Robert to the top of a hill. From there, an impressive landscape unfolded before them. They could see vast expanses of land, cities with imposing buildings and small villages. The panorama seemed to extend infinitely. Intrigued, Robert asked how it was possible for such variety to exist. Edwin replied, "Here, just like on Earth, people have different preferences. Some prefer to live in cities, others prefer rural areas, and there are those who enjoy both. In this world, everything can be materialized through the force of thought. Each soul creates its environment based on its desires and needs." Robert began to understand that life in the afterlife could be like moving to an unknown country. Some elements were familiar, but others were completely new and different. Edwin also explained something that particularly caught Benson's attention: why so many people in the spirit world seemed younger than they were at the time of their death. "There is a rule here," Edwin explained. "As we progress spiritually, we leave external burdens behind. Our appearance begins to reflect our true essence and the level of development we have reached. Because of this, many regain the vigor and energy they had in their youth. On the spiritual plane, the signs of aging that we know from earthly life disappear. The wrinkles that time and worries left on our faces fade away, as do other marks accumulated over the years. Our appearance becomes younger, while our wisdom and spiritual depth intensify. However, this does not imply that we become completely young again or lose our unique characteristics. Such a thing would result in overwhelming monotony. Rather, our appearance is influenced by how old we were at the time of our transition to the spiritual world and how we perceive ourselves at the point of greatest fulfillment in our life. Generally, souls choose an appearance that reflects their personal idea of the bright beginning or dawn of their existence. During his exploration of another sphere of existence, Robert Benson walked with his guide, Edwin, along a path that bordered a stream of crystal-clear water. The light of a divine sun illuminated the water, making it shine with stunning clarity, while emitting soft musical tones that wove together in a harmonious, enveloping melody. Intrigued, Benson approached the stream and decided to touch the water. As he dipped his hand in, he expected to feel an icy temperature, but to his surprise, the water was warm and emitted a revitalizing energy. Edwin explained that this contact had charged him with new strength. Benson's next destination was a place he described as the home of science. There he met numerous scientists whose names were familiar to him from his earthly life. Edwin explained that after crossing over to the spiritual world, these scientists continued to work on their research, although they did so in a completely different way than they did on Earth. In this place, Edwin explained, inventions are not intended to solve practical problems as they are on Earth. We do not need to increase our speed, since we move by thought. There is also no need for weapons, since there is nothing to fear or protect here. In this world, everything necessary for a safe and comfortable life is already available. The main purpose of inventions here is to explore and reveal the secrets of the universe. In his communications from beyond, Benson also stressed that music plays a fundamental role in the spiritual world. There are large palaces dedicated exclusively to its study, creation, and perfection. The souls residing in these places work on the development of different musical genres, since music enhances sensitivity to the spiritual aspects of the other world. At first, Benson thought that this new world had no boundaries, but Edwin explained to him that the spiritual plane is also bounded. It is composed of various spheres arranged in concentric circles around the Earth, Edwin explained. Although these circles seem to extend into infinity, each sphere is imperceptible to those who inhabit the lower levels. However, those who descend can notice how the environment progressively degrades, transforming from beautiful landscapes into arid and desolate lands. As they ascend, the opposite occurs. The environment becomes more subtle and perfect, Edwin continued, creating a natural barrier that can only be overcome by those who have reached sufficient spiritual development to become inhabitants of the higher spheres. Benson's guide explained all this to him and encouraged him to explore a lower sphere known as the region of darkness. These spheres are strongly linked to the Earth and, at their lowest level, even merge with it. When Robert Benson arrived at this place, he immediately felt a chill. The surroundings were cold and damp, completely devoid of light. Everything around him was devoid of color, and the air was permeated with a nauseating stench, resembling the smell of rotting flesh. In his messages from beyond, Benson commented that if people on Earth knew how many historical figures are in these lower spheres, they would be deeply shocked. He even met souls of people who, during their lifetime, were convinced that they led a blameless existence. However, their perfection was superficial. Deep inside they were still deeply selfish. According to Benson, it does not matter how many seemingly good actions someone performs if they are motivated by personal interest or vanity. In that case, they are not genuine good actions, and such souls will inevitably end up in the region of darkness. Benson also commented that many people on Earth believe that the earthly and spiritual worlds are completely separate, as if they were two separate planets with no connection to each other. However, he clarified that there is constant communication between the two planes. Souls in the spiritual world are fully aware of what is happening on Earth, something that Benson repeatedly stressed in his messages from beyond the grave. As for time and space, Benson noted that both are present in the spiritual world, although their nature is different. On Earth, time is determined by the rotation of the planet and its orbit around the Sun, which gives rise to the cycles of day, night, and seasons. Clocks and calendars offer us a constant way to measure it. However, in the spiritual world there are no clocks or mechanical devices to record the passage of time. There, time does not follow a cyclical pattern, but flows continuously. Benson explained. On the spiritual plane, time and space are real, but they operate in a different dimension than the earthly one. Each soul heads toward the sphere for which it prepared during its life on Earth. It is there that we reap the results of the seeds we sow in the material world. In the lower spheres, Benson observed souls trapped in deformed and unpleasant bodies. The sounds echoing around them resembled the screams of people in agony. According to his account, this state can last for a long time, until the soul, through its own will and effort, decides to begin a process of spiritual renewal. Sharing his personal experience, Benson described how amazing it was to become a permanent inhabitant of the spiritual world. No matter how much you read or hear about life after death, he stated, every soul will be faced with countless surprises. Trying to describe this world using earthly terms is extremely difficult. Even if you imagine the greatest beauty you have ever seen on earth and multiply it by 100, you would still be far from capturing the true essence of what exists here. Benson made a key point. The role or status a person had during his life on earth has no relevance in the spiritual world. Material or social achievements have no weight here. On this plane, only spiritual development defines who a soul is and what its destiny will be. Benson made a key point. The role or status a person had during his life on earth has no relevance in the spiritual world. Material or social achievements have no weight here. On this plane, only spiritual development defines who a soul is and what its destiny will be.